Welcome, Big Ten fans. This is Big Ten Ted Live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Big Ten Ted Live. In the words of Cody Rhodes, so what do you guys want to talk about? There is plenty to talk about here tonight on Big Ten Ted Live, and you guys will have your opportunity to chime in. I can guarantee you that. There is a lot happening tonight, and I am so happy that you are coming along for the ride here this evening. The weather has been outstanding here in Minnesota, getting up to the mid-80s. It is beautiful outside, and it is a beautiful time to be a Big Ten fan. In the TV biz, we call it the format. Some people call it the rundown. Here's the rundown for tonight's program on Big Ten Ted Live. You know we're going to talk about it. The Big Ten Conference has their seventh commissioner. Yes, 7 commissioners in just over 100 years since 1922. Tony Petitti is the 7th commissioner of the Big Ten Conference. What does it mean right now for the Big Ten? What does it mean for the future of the Big Ten? There is a lot to break down because the more I thought about it, this news came out yesterday, and the more you think about it, the more thoughts I was able to kind of develop in my mind. We live in an era, we live in a day and age of instant gratification, instant reaction. I do that a lot for the football games that I cover in the fall. But when I was able to sit down and really think about this for a day, I thought of some other thoughts. Because when I instantly got the news, I had one thought, but then the more I think about it, kind of drifted towards some other thoughts as well. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into my reaction because that is the big news of the day. Spoiler alert, I love the hire from the Big Ten Conference. I think a lot of people love the hire for the Big Ten Conference. After they went on the Googled his name, looked at his Wikipedia, which I screenshotted and posted on Twitter. I think a lot of people, after they really find out that this has been the guy behind the scenes at CBS, at ABC back in the day, Major League Baseball, I think once people found that out, oh, that's the guy that's been in these types of positions with these types of leagues. I think once people found that out, then they're like, yeah, I think this is pretty good. So we'll get into that, of course, as this show progresses. And it's funny because when I was preparing for topics to talk about on the live show this week, the main topic, the main event, the topic on the marquee was going to be, what is the end game for Big Ten expansion? When we look 20 years, when we look 30 years down the road, what's the end game? What does the Big Ten want to accomplish? What are the goals? What's their strategy? That was going to be the main topic, and now we've got a new Big Ten commissioner with the background that he does. And now the topic of the new Big Ten commissioner flows right in to what the end game is going to be for the Big Ten. So that really worked out really well on my part. So I was pretty happy with that, how that all ended up. So we're going to talk about that. I'm not necessarily going to throw schools at you in terms of an end game. They need to add X, Y, and Z. They need to add A, B, and C. I'm not going to throw that out you. I'm going to throw out, what is the strategic end game? What does the Big Ten want to accomplish when the dust settles kind of on all this conference realignment? It's a fun time of year. Weather's getting warmer, and so are the conference realignment rumors. How's it going, Colorado? How's it going, Arizona? Outside the Big Ten, it's heating up as well. So we're going to talk about that. Also, there are 4 spring football games this Saturday. 4 spring football games. Indiana, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State. Those last 2 are the headliners. We're going to preview those. We're going to talk about those as well. 3 out of those 4 teams have quarterback battles We'll talk about those. We'll talk about some headlines, some storylines going into those spring games will be. I think we're going to learn a lot from those spring games as well. If you are new to the channel, it is a great time to subscribe. With all the news going on in Big Ten country, this is, if you're new to everything here, I put out Big Ten content every day. Okay, I do videos on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays here during the off season, with now the weekly live stream on Wednesdays, some shorts videos, those vertical videos, during the weekend from content earlier in the week. So polls and everything, all kinds of content throughout here on Big Ten Ted. So if you haven't already subscribed, also on Twitter at Big Ten Ted. Quickly before we get into our first topic, which will be Tony Petitti, new commissioner, coming up this week on the channel. Ohio State quarterback, that's coming up tomorrow. Doesn't really matter who the quarterback's going to be with all the skill position talent that they have. And then on Friday, I got college football playoff. Will it kill the bowl games once and for all? So make sure you tune into the channel here later in the week as we talk about that. All right, let's talk about, but actually got one more thing before we get into the Tony Petitti topic. See, some of you are already active in the chat. That's a great way to be a part of the show and join the show here today. A super chat as well is another great way to join the show and support the show and what I'm doing here at Big Ten Ted. And then the Big Ten Ted hotline, 715-600-2150. What we're going to do segments. After each segment, we're going to talk about the segments in the form of chats, in the form of phone calls, that kind of thing. So we'll do that. If you got something else you want to talk about, this is an interactive program. The one reason I love doing these live streams is to interact with the people and have discussions. A lot of times during the channel, it's me talking to you, you typing in the comments. But this is an interactive program where we can go back and forth. So that is an option if you are so inclined to do so. All right, everybody. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get what you all came here to talk about. The Big Ten Conference has their 7th commissioner in the history of this very prestigious conference, of this very highly sought-after conference for some schools to get into the conference. Tony Petitti, who is he? Why should we care? He's literally done it all as a sports media executive. Tony Petitti has been there and done that. In a little bit here, I'm going to flash up a full-page graphic on the screen about his career highlights. Highlights is the key word there because, man, if I put his whole career resume into a full-page graphic, let's just say that graphic would be greater than the 1920 by 1080 resolution that this stream comes out at you because it is a big resume. That font would be tiny when we talk about his career resume. Now, the first thing I thought of, this immediately came out of my brain, through my fingers, and onto Twitter. The first thing I thought of, because like a lot of people, I thought Jim Phillips was the leader in the clubhouse. I really did. But when I got time to think, I'm almost glad the way the Big Ten went the way they did. Because my first thought was, because the day before it was announced Jim Phillips re-signed an extension to be the commissioner of the ACC. I thought, well, maybe Jim Phillips is talking to the Big Ten. They're going back and forth, negotiating, doing whatever. And then he ends up staying with the ACC, getting a raise. The Big Ten goes to option number 2. That was the first thing that I thought of. But, like I said at the top of the show, when I kind of had some time to think about it, here's the way I think things really went down. Jim Phillips was once again in the race. He was one of the candidates to be the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference. And he's more of a traditional guy. He's not as maybe progressive as some of these other commissioners are that have been outside of college athletics. Guys like a Brett Yormark, a Kevin Warren, and now Tony Petitti, he hasn't been that guy. And then once it was announced and once it was revealed to Jim that Tony Petitti was going to be the next commissioner of the Big Ten Conference, he went and, the ACC knew that he was negotiating, and then he went and signed an extension with the ACC after he was not hired as the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference. It seems like the latter, based on what we now know about Tony Petitti and his great resume. Based on what we now know, it seems like it's the latter that happened. But you could understand why the first thing I thought of was, well, Tony Petitti is the second choice guy. I think we can all agree the Big Ten gets who they want. The Big Ten gets their number one choice. And Tony Petitti was their number one choice. All right, everybody, let's throw up the full page graphic. Here are the highlights of Tony Petitti's career. Keyword highlights, as I said before. So, he was hired by ABC Sports in 1988 as a general attorney. Later on, he was named the vice president of programming. During his stint as the vice president of programming, that's where he was involved in creating the Bowl Championship Series. Say what you want about the BCS. It was the first true way to determine a national champion without just voting in the AP poll or voting in the coaches poll. He was a part of that. He created that when that started in 1998. Later on, he moved on to CBS Sports, 1997, as Senior Vice President of Business Affairs and Programming. In 2005, he was named Executive Vice President of CBS Sports. There's a quote, I believe, on the Wikipedia page that says, everything you see on Sunday was overseen by Tony Petitti in terms of CBS. You're talking about events like the Super Bowl, like the Masters, like the NCAA basketball tournament, all the big events that CBS has done over the years during that time period, which was a big boom period for CBS Sports. He was in charge of, and he was overseeing all of that at CBS Sports. This included, remember CSTV, College Sports TV? He was involved in the infancy of CSTV, which would later become CBS Sports Network. When you talk about his involvement with the BCS, when we talk about his involvement with CSTV, he has dabbled with college sports. He has been involved with administrators and high-level people within college sports. He's been there and done that. That's why he's the hybrid. And now let's talk more about the professional sports. He was hired by Major League Baseball in 2008 as the head of MLB Network, a network that hadn't yet launched yet. It eventually would launch in January 2009 and eventually become a very successful professional sports television network. Tony Petitti in 2015, after Rob Manfred became commissioner, he became the chief operating officer of Major League Baseball. And that's very important when we talk about Tony Petitti, because in that position, he was also deputy commissioner in some departments as well. You're having to deal with 30 Major League Baseball owners. And when we talk about dealing with owners, it's talking about what can you do for them? How can you make them money by doing certain things, signing certain media contracts and doing all the sorts of things that professional sports do to make the owners money? That experience is going to pay off very well for Tony Petitti, because that experience, dealing with 30 owners of Major League Baseball, you're going to have to deal with 16 university presidents, and you're going to have to manage all of them. When they ask, how are we going to make more money in the next television contract? How are we going to make more money in terms of the college football playoff, which is coming up soon? He's got to be able to talk to every single one of them and make them happy. He's been there and he's done that. Those are the career highlights. That's the career resume of Tony Petitti. This is a move in the right direction. If you were one of those guys, and I know some guys that were anti-Kevin Warren, I know some guys that were pro-Kevin Warren, but if you were one of those guys that were anti-Kevin Warren and wanted a guy that was more in the college realm, university athletic director, president, Gene Smith, Jim Phillips, those kinds of guys, Tony Petitti's not your guy. He's also not Kevin Warren, though. I want to make that clear. I believe if you're comparing COO of the Minnesota Vikings, Kevin Warren, to this Tony Petitti, I think Tony Petitti brings a lot more to the Big Ten Conference than Kevin Warren did. there were a lot of ups and downs in a short period of time for Kevin. He did some good things for the conference, of course, started off on kind of a sour note, right? Canceling the college football season during that 2020 season, a tough time for any experienced commissioner, not mentioning a new commissioner. But I believe Tony Petitti is a little bit different. I think Tony Petitti brings a dabble of college sports. He brings a dabble of professional sports because if you know anything about college sports right now, it is moving towards a professional model. Okay, if you wanted a guy that was maybe more in the college landscape, in the college venue, Tony Petitti is not your guy. Because Tony Petitti is going to further the Big Ten. Right now, your conference commissioners, a lot of them are from outside the box of college athletics. Because if you hire a guy that's within college athletics, it seems like the status quo. If you wanted the status quo, go ahead and hire Jim Phillips. Go ahead and hire ex-athletic director, whoever you want to plug in. But you want to continue to take steps forward as the Big Ten Conference. I believe Kevin Warren laid the groundwork. I believe he started things going towards the right direction. Like I said, there were some ups and downs with Kevin. But he started laying the groundwork. And now Tony Petitti's job is to take it to the next level. What this move tells me is the university presidents wanted a guy that could further their revenue. What can you do for us? They wanted a guy that could further the Big Ten Conference, that could continue to bring in more and more and more revenue. That's the kind of guy that the Big Ten presidents wanted. And that's the kind of guy that they got in Tony Petitti. College sports is changing. If you hire a guy as your commissioner, that's kind of a more traditional, older school kind of guy, you're going to get left behind. And the Big Ten wants to stay progressive. They want to stay ahead of the curve. They want to stay the revenue giant. Yes, was college sports great? Me growing up, the pure tradition, Big Ten, Pac-10, and the Rose Bowl, all that stuff. Sure, you can appreciate that aspect of college sports, and I think you can still embrace the future and what's to come. You can embrace conferences that go from the East Coast to the West Coast. You can embrace players making millions of dollars on NIL. You can embrace these large television contracts. You can embrace a sport that has money pretty at the center of it. I think you can live in both worlds. I think both can be great. College football will always be great. I believe college athletics will always be great. The university experience combined with sports will always be great. And it's Tony Petitti's job to really take the Big Ten to the next level. I'm going to talk about this in my next segment, about what's the end game for the Big Ten. Because I think what we're talking about now has a lot to do with what the end game, the goals, the strategies, the vision, the future. Tony Petitti, you got to think he had to pitch his vision and pitch his future to these Big Ten presidents. And he did exactly that. The combination, the hybrid, I think it's a great hire for the Big Ten Conference. I think the Big Ten is, there's a lot of questions out there, and I'm going to get to your chats because there are questions. And I'm going to get to that in my endgame segment as well. There's a lot of questions. Okay, now we got a commissioner. Now what? What's next? I think, college, conference realignment, all these talks stood still. And now we've got the big chess piece that has moved forward. The Big Ten has a new commissioner. And this is a guy that has, and I tweeted this, man, you've got a guy that's had great relationships at CBS People have come out in droves. You look at the Tim Brandos and the Bonnie Bernsteins, the guys that have worked for Tony Petitti, the guys and gals that have worked for Tony Petitti, and said how great of a boss he was and how many contacts he has at CBS, at ABC/ESPN if they want to get in the fold again. Of course, Major League Baseball, Fox is a great partner over there. He was heavily involved with those, and I tweeted this today. It's a lot easier. It is a lot easier to negotiate deals playing golf, playing 18 holes with a buddy you've known for 30 years, than to come in as the new kid on the block and try to negotiate maybe with somebody that you don't know. You got to think that Tony Petitti has a lot of those media contacts, television network executives, because he's been there. He knows what it takes to get a deal done, and now he's seen both sides of the coin. It's a great hire. I think the Big Ten is going to take a step forward, and the next few months are going to be gigantic. They are going to be huge. Okay, because you've got college football playoff meetings. Tony Petitti starts in the middle of May. You got college football playoff meetings, and expansion is hanging over everybody's head right now. Okay, the Pac-12 is such a big pendulum right now. Okay, because you got to think there's a deal. George Kliavkov has talked to these media partners, and he doesn't have a good enough deal to put in front of these people right now. That seems to be what's happening. Okay? Teams are going to wait. The Oregons, the Washingtons, the Stanfords, the Cals of the world, they're going to wait. Colorado and Arizona, maybe they're going to be a little bit ahead of the curve right now, headed to the Big 12, because they know if we haven't seen a deal yet, it's probably not going to be good. Ion CW, give me a break. Give me a freaking break. First Dawson's Creek, and then Stanford versus Washington State football. That'll sell, baby. Okay, let's get to your comments. That's what I think on Tony Petitti. Let's get to your comments. Buckshot Kid checking in here tonight. Thanks for being a part of the show. Appreciate that. Daniel Mountcastle, it is popping tonight. You bet. There's a lot of news. It's a big college football day, and it is April 12th. That's how you know things are really heating up. Congo checking in. Tony Petitti is the next Jim Delaney. That'd be great company. I've mentioned the Big Ten is a destination job. It should not be a stepping stone job. I believe Kevin Warren is the outlier. He's an NFL guy, came from an NFL background, and now he ended up back in the NFL. Maybe he just loves the NFL. Okay, I think he's the exception to the rule. Daniel Mountcastle as well with a suggestion. Really appreciate this. Get Greg Flukar on your show. If there's anybody on YouTube, on television, on any sort of media that I rely on for conference realignment, expansion, all that stuff, it's college football's peak around the corner. That's my stop for news. That's where I go. I think it's the best source for that information. He's done a great job, fantastic job, growing his channel. A couple of Minnesota boys getting it done on the YouTube sphere. So hopefully one day. It's funny. I've talked to him about possibly getting on here. So hold on for that. We'll see what happens. All right, let's see what else we got here. Congo once again checking in. The Big 16 or the Big 10 is 2 steps ahead of the Big 12. 2, I think, is putting it mildly. I think that's putting it friendly. I think for a lot of people right now, because the Big 12. I appreciate what the Big 12 is doing. Okay, if they're able to get Colorado and Arizona, like is maybe rumored. That could be the start of things kind of going south for the Pac-12. But I think Brett Yormark is kind of one of those guys. I think Brett Yormark and Tony Petitti are those outside-the-box guys that are going to lead the way for the new age of college athletics. John Brink checking in. Can Petitti be the one to get Notre Dame? That's going to be the question, and Notre Dame will come up later in this live stream. So stay tuned for that. We're going to talk about Notre Dame when we talk about our end game for the Big Ten Conference in terms of expansion. Notre Dame's a tough one because of their deal with the ACC. It's a little bit tough for Notre Dame, but we'll see if it can happen. I think it could. It's just, they're locked into a deal with the ACC until 2036. Some of these things might take time, folks. Some of these things might not happen overnight. Okay? Jonathan Weaver checking in. Chances of the Big Ten expanding by the summer. Once again, we're all going to this endgame segment. We're all going to that endgame segment. When I heard this news, right? I've been talking on this channel recently about Oregon and Washington's value. I'm not sure if the news really changes my opinion about Oregon and Washington's value. My deal with the Ducks and the Huskies has always been, I just don't know. I don't know how much money Amazon, ESPN, whoever's willing to pay for a Friday night slot, Big Ten After Dark, I don't know how much money there is at stake. Some people say $100 million. $100 million. You split Oregon and Washington at 80, the rest goes to the rest of the members. Oh, all of a sudden, Oregon and Washington add value. I don't know if Fox, CBS, NBC are willing to up the pay like maybe those ESPN and Fox are in the Big 12 with other teams potentially coming. I just don't know. It's so hard to know. But you got to think, if someone can finagle a deal with Fox and CBS and then NBC, but Fox and CBS, Tony Petitti, very familiar with those networks and very familiar with potentially getting ESPN back into the fold, there's the potential that he could maybe convince them to up it a little bit for Oregon and Washington. I think the big thing is the new money. ESPN, Amazon Prime, Apple TV is the new money. Think that Oregon and Washington have that extra value. Are they worth $100 million? Because if Oregon and Washington come in as reduced shares at $40 million a pop, the rest of the $20 million goes out to the remaining members, so you're looking at just over $1 million or so more per year. That could be worth it. Now all of a sudden Oregon and Washington bring value. But what I've been saying is that I just don't know if the Ducks and the Huskies would be those pair of teams to draw that amount of money in one time slot to the Big Ten. That's what I've been saying. I just don't know. So, to answer your question, what are the chances of them expanding by the summer? I will say this. They are greater today than they were a week or two ago. Now, I know you had an outgoing commissioner. Of course they're greater. I would even say they're greater than they were 3 or 4 months ago because of Tony Petitti's relationships and his ability to maybe broker a deal and get these things to work. He's going to have a lot on his plate early. I mentioned college football playoff meetings, right, where they're going to talk about that. There's a lot of revenue distribution talks that maybe could happen. Watched the Big Ten Network earlier today. Nicole Auerbach does a great job, fantastic job with them, and she was talking about that in terms of that's how it is in college basketball, right? You get those teams that the further they go in the tournament, those are the teams that get the revenue. It's not just spread all across. I'm usually not a fan of uneven distribution. I'm not a fan of that uneven distribution usually. But when it comes to advancing in a tournament like the NCAA tournament, like the college football playoff, well, then maybe, yeah, they deserve to have unequal revenue because a lot of teams are going to be Big Ten and SEC. A lot of the teams, 12 teams. You're going to have 2 out of the 6 conference champions. A lot of those teams now are going to be the Big Ten or the SEC. Texas, Oklahoma, USC. Yeah, those could be playoff teams. Those could all be playoff teams. I think it's greater. I think we got to wait a little bit to I can't sit here and say, yep, Oregon and Washington, book it. Could it happen? Absolutely. I've said it could happen before. It could have happened before when I was saying all this about Oregon and Washington. And I want to say this about the Ducks and the Huskies. As a fan of the Big Ten Conference, as a fan of the Big Ten for over 20 years, I want to say this. I would love to see Oregon, specifically Oregon, and then Washington also in the conference. Seeing Penn State travel to a raucous Autzen Stadium and Oregon's wearing chrome helmets and their green jerseys and whatever uniform combination, the Duck comes out on the motorcycle. It's a great scene. Oregon is one of those programs that people that are maybe casuals that they can recognize. They can recognize the uniforms, and they recognize Oregon because this is a team that in the past 10 years or so has been successful. They have been at that top 10 and top 5 type of level. Washington's made a playoff. They're maybe not as recognizable as Oregon, but people know Oregon that maybe don't watch college football a ton. I can't remember where I saw it or where I heard it. I should really start taking notes of these things. But when you talk about Oregon, I heard that they were one of the most watched teams in the Pac-12. And now you got Penn State, Ohio State, Nebraska, Wisconsin. Now those teams are playing Oregon. Those ratings are going to shoot up even more for Ducks games. Very interested to see what's going to happen there. It's going to happen quick, people. It's going to happen quick. Congo checking in at games saying ESPN throwing money at Jim Phillips to stay at the ACC. It's possible. It's possible. Still going down the pike here, going through some of your comments. Appreciate everybody for being here tonight. A lot of big news here tonight. Tony checking in. $1 million a school, that won't come close to paying the extra travel costs. That's that's also something that has been talked about before, the travel. I talked about the travel on the last live show. When it comes to Oregon and comes to Washington, that's a big concern. You also have to factor in teams in the same time zone, all that stuff. There's a lot of things to factor in. And yes, if you're adding Oregon and Washington, you got to factor in travel costs. So now when we talk about money, now that money's good. So now you got $100 million. Well, now we got to go to $120 million. Got to go to $140, $150 million. Keeps on going up and up, doesn't it? So there's that. I got a comment here. I'm going to put my water bottle down because I see an interesting comment that I could talk about here from Sunshine Design. Big Ten, after dark or Friday night game seems very appealing evening games for fans. Can't sit for an 11 a.m. kickoff. Love the after dinner games. So, Big Ten after dark. That's a 10 Eastern. It's a 10:30 Eastern, something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I can't remember exactly what time those games are. But I will say this. If you add more teams on the Pacific Coast, if you go with all 6, you go all in, baby, push your chips to the middle, USC, UCLA, Cal, Stanford, Oregon, Washington, now all of a sudden, those teams are maybe more in favor of a Big Ten after dark. You have West Coast primetime games. I think the big concern is fans of an Iowa, especially a Maryland, a Rutgers, a Penn State, staying up that late to watch their team play. I think that's the big question. If we can answer that question, if that question can be answered, I think Big Ten After Dark could be a good time slot. If we go all in on West Coast expansion. If we don't, if it's just USC and UCLA, then maybe you just add Oregon and Washington. A majority of those times you got teams traveling over to watch those games. That's why I've always thought a Friday night slot seemed better, especially on Amazon. Right after the Thursday night game, Friday, you lead into Saturday. I work on a lot of Friday nights covering high school football, so maybe it wouldn't work the best for me, per se. But I've always thought Friday night before. Who knows how much money you can get from a Friday night time slot in a Big Ten After Dark time slot. Maybe the Big Ten After Dark time slot isn't, and maybe it's not every week. You go and add the West Coast teams, and maybe it's just the West Coast teams playing Big Ten After Dark. Big West Coast versus West Coast, that kind of thing. I don't know. I think there's a lot to break down there. Because if Big Ten After Dark can work, then maybe you have something. Now you have a little bit more revenue to work with. Washington won a national title back in 1991, the year Big Ten Ted was born. Yes, the 1991 team back then won a national championship for Washington. So they've won one in my lifetime. Let's see here. Congo checking in. By the fifth year, the Big Three will need inventory to fill those time slots each week to support USC, Michigan, Nebraska, Penn State, and Ohio State. We need teams like an Oregon, and Washington, and Notre Dame. That's a very interesting point. If you watched my video before, obviously still up on the channel, about my this year 2023 predictions for the Fox, the CBS, the NBC games. Go check it out if you haven't already. There were some I'll say that some weeks were better than others. You never got Rutgers versus Northwestern. All due respect to the fan bases of those, or the fans of those, the fan bases there for the Scarlet Knights. But those networks want big-time football. That's what they want, and you raise a valid point. Having Oregon, Notre Dame, and Washington thrown in there, better teams, better value, higher ratings. You keep on going down the pike. Better games for the bigger networks. I see where you're coming from with that comment. That comment makes a lot of sense to me. It makes a lot of sense. I'll say that. But the Big Ten presidents have to, they got to factor in some stuff as well. How much are they, ain't nobody taking a pay cut, let me tell you that much. Athletic directors, people, administrators have said publicly that, you know, we will just want to sit here and watch the dust settle. But that was a long time ago. Things are ever changing. They are ever evolving in today's day and age. Appreciate the words here from Gavin. We continue to grow, continue to go forward with these live streams on a weekly basis. Every Wednesday, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central. Mark your calendars. Some people talking about Nebraska and Northwestern. I did see the line come out. Nebraska is an 8-point underdog against the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Depends what Minnesota can do defensively. They got to retool that defense in the transfer portal this spring. Minnesota has brought in some good players on offense. I think if Athan can develop a little bit, they might have some good players on the offensive side of the football. We'll get to that a little bit later. More comments here. Very much appreciate everybody for coming by here tonight on the live stream, Big Ten Ted Live. Once again, you can be a part of the show here tonight by chatting, super chatting, or calling in at the Big Ten Ted hotline, 715-600-2150, 715-600-2150. Oh, so what else we got to get to tonight? We are going to get to the end game. We're going to get to the end game of the Big Ten Conference. So now you've got Tony Petitti is the commissioner of the Big Ten. What does this mean? Where is the Big Ten going? Where's their strategy? Where's their vision? Where is all of these things going? We'll talk about that. We also got 4 spring games here this weekend. We'll talk about that. Indiana, Michigan State, Penn State, and Ohio State. What are some interesting storylines, some battles to watch for with that? Let's talk about the end game, that is the Big Ten Conference. Because now with the hiring of Tony Petitti, you got to think he pitched a vision, he pitched a strategy. You got to think that happened. And before this announcement was even made that the Big Ten was getting a new commissioner, this was on the docket for me to talk about. And now that we have a new commissioner, things they seem to be a little bit different. They feel a little bit different to me. So I'm not going to come out here and say they need to add Stanford, Cal, Washington, Oregon, Notre Dame, da-da-da-da-da. I'm not going to talk about that per se. I am going to mention schools as this segment progresses, but I'm not going to specifically say, well, their end game needs to be this or their end game needs to be that in terms of a school perspective. I want to talk about what's their vision, what's their strategy, where do they really want to go? Because I believe that's the first thing you need. You need a strategy, you need a vision, you need all of these things in order to grab a Notre Dame, a Washington, a North Carolina, a Florida State, a Georgia Tech. You need a plan. So what's the plan? What's the end game? I firmly believe that the Big Ten's end game is to be a revenue giant. The moves that they have made, the realignment moves that they've made over their history suggest this. Fan bases like Nebraska and Penn State, Rutgers and Maryland with the high population areas over there and the markets that they bring in and the money and subscribers that they bring in. Los Angeles, USC, and UCLA. The moves that they have made over the years, before we even knew who Tony Petitti was all about growing the revenue of the Big Ten Conference. I firmly believe the end game for the Big Ten, and this is why they hired Tony Petitti. This is why they put a television executive in the chair to be the Big Ten commissioner. Okay? The reason why he's here right now is because of this, is because they want to be, I firmly believe, and I think the Big Ten can do this. I think the Big Ten can be the second highest grossing revenue league in the United States behind the National Football League. I honestly believe that's where their goal is. We are just scratching the surface of what college sports is yet to become. Increased media deals for Big Ten athletes, increased NIL deals that increase the exposure of a college athlete. Their goal and their strategy is to make as much money and around the same amount of money as the NFL. Right? When you look at it right now, you look at the NHL, you look at Major League Baseball. Like right now, Fox has the Big Ten as a property. They also have Major League Baseball as a property. Major League Baseball is important. If it came down to cutting one of them, which one do you think they'd cut? What direction is college athletics going? What direction is baseball going? Okay? Viewership of baseball has been declining. Viewership of college football has been increasing. So, I believe the Big Ten, I firmly believe that the Big Ten might be the most valuable product outside of the NFL right now to Fox. I honestly believe that. I really believe that. I know baseball is important. I know baseball is a really popular sport, but I honestly think football, and Big Ten football particularly, is going on the uptick. I honestly believe that. And I think it is the Big Ten's goal to make sure that they are in that spot where they can be a revenue giant, where they can be a revenue monster. We'll see how baseball progresses here throughout the years. But as we sit right here and right now, football is such a ingrained and people watch and love football so much. I just think that's why Big Ten football and the Big Ten Conference is the way they're at. The value for a specific television network is where it's at. When you talk about and you go further down the end game, okay, so we want to gross this much money. We want to make this much money. Okay, where do we go from here? How do we make that much money? How do we continue to grow the revenue of the Big Ten Conference? I honestly believe, and someone said it earlier here in the comments, I believe, and you might like it, and you might not like it, but it's Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a very key part of this. They are a huge national brand. They have a large fan base. They have a large alumni base. When we talk about the direction that the Big Ten Conference is going, we talk about a nationwide brand. We talk about a nationwide conference. That's where we're going. Conferences in general are going away from their regionality and they're going more national. Notre Dame for years, because of their NBC contract, has had a national following and has had a national fan base for a very, very long time. And I believe it fits into the vision of the future of the Big Ten. And they already got rivalries thrown in there as well. So in order to really increase your brand and to really increase where the Big Ten is going and where the Big Ten continues to go, I think the main thing that you've got to talk about to get to that revenue monster that you want to be, okay, sticking with the status quo might not be the best scenario. You need to expand at some point. You need to keep going above and beyond. That's why expansion moves have been made over the course of expansion, to create revenue, to create value for a television contract to bring in. Okay? So let's talk about this. There are teams out east that are very attractive, that would increase big media markets, that would increase exposure with big-time teams and big-time programs and big-time games. There are teams out east that accomplish that. But then if you look out west, there's a chance for the Big Ten to dominate the West Coast. When we talk about Big Ten country, it's kind of weird. Oh, LA is going to be Big Ten country. That's not something you really think of when you think of Big Ten country. But now you have the chance for Los Angeles to be Big Ten country. You have the chance for San Francisco in the Bay Area, which is a top 15 market in the United States. You have a chance for that to be Big Ten country. You have a chance for Seattle, which is near a top 10 market. You have a chance for that to be Big Ten country. You look at Portland, the entire state of California would be Big Ten country. You have the opportunity to own the West Coast. We know there's a lot of alumni in Silicon Valley, by Stanford, by Cal, and there's a lot of alumni in that area. I talked about that last week on the live show when it pertains to Stanford and Cal. I'm not going to quite say having Los Angeles, okay, that's a huge part to the West Coast, but I think there's more parts to the West Coast. Oregon recently has gone in and recruited a lot of California. I think that's important. I think owning the West Coast could be an end game for the Big Ten Conference. Let's look out east for a minute. Let's look out east, because right now there's going to, when we talk about the end game, when we talk about the Big Ten in 10 years and 15 years and 20 years, when this ACC deal is going to come up, okay, when we talk about that, we talk about Miami's, Clemson's, Florida State's. What do all three of those schools have in common? They're not AAU. Georgia Tech, really, when you talk about an AAU school, Georgia Tech, I guess. North Carolina is out there too. North Carolina is probably a bit, but Georgia Tech brings Atlanta. They bring that big recruiting base, that big market down there in Atlanta, in hot Atlanta. So let's look at this some more. Out east, I firmly believe when you take a look at the end game, you got to take a look at it realistically. Because the SEC, I think, has their eye on what's happening and has their eye on what's happening out there with these ACC schools. Clemson's and Florida States that are complaining about the revenue right now. They're not happy about it. Purdue's making twice as much as Florida State as Clemson, you know? Like, they're not happy about it. The SEC is sitting there and says Miami and Clemson and Florida State all fit into the geography of the SEC. The SEC obviously has the prestige, you know, there as well. Clemson and South Carolina's a rivalry. Clemson and Georgia has been played. You know, you keep on going down the pike, and that seems to be it because the SEC could be in trouble. The SEC could be in trouble if the Big Ten goes down and grabs Miami and grabs Florida State and grabs all of like if they get it a foothold in the South, if they're able to go down there and they're able to get it done, now all of a sudden, especially the recruiting basis, that's the thing that people need to, because when you talk about recruiting bases, there's three huge ones. Los Angeles, Southern California, the Houston area, and South Florida. If the Big Ten, that's, I think, when you talk about the end game, I think you got to take a look at how can we increase the talent. You can increase the talent by getting into really good recruiting markets. We don't know how the Big Ten's going to grow with LA. This could be just a complete gold mine right now, and we're not even realizing just how big of a deal this is going to be with members 15 and 16. The Big Ten could just own, we know USC is going to recruit good in LA, UCLA, all that stuff. But you could see teams like Wisconsin and Nebraska, maybe Iowa, and then the Ohio States, the Penn States, the Michigan States, go into LA and become even better teams and have even better talent because there's a whole mess of talent in Southern California. There's a lot of great high school football programs that continuously pump out 4 stars and 5 stars. Okay? Now if you add on LA and now you add on Miami and South Florida and the whole state of Florida, that's scary for the SEC. My point is, I think, and I've said this for a few months now, I believe the SEC is going to protect their turf. I believe the SEC has already built-in rivals and all the things that come with it. Florida State and Miami, maybe Clemson and maybe Georgia Tech. Because they fear if the Big Ten gets into Atlanta, Atlanta's a great recruiting market. They get into Miami, they get into that type of area. Now all of a sudden the SEC's foothold. Now the SEC is still going to be the SEC. There's still, Louisiana's got great players. Alabama's got great players. Texas, of course, they're in Texas with the 2 biggest universities in Texas. Have great players. They're still going to recruit. They're still going to be an elite conference. But now if the Big Ten is able to get into Florida, South Florida, and they're able to get into Atlanta, now all of a sudden the game has changed. Even if they're able to get 2 out of those 4. Like say the Big Ten goes in there, and I heard Florida State's on the edge of being AAU, Florida State and Georgia Tech grabbed by the Big Ten, and Miami and Clemson grabbed by the SEC, and then so on and so forth with the rest of the ACC. That is big. If the Big Ten can get into the Southeast, the recruiting would take a huge step up. A huge step up for Big Ten recruiting. Okay? Like when we talk about the end game, I would love to get down in Florida. But when I look at this realistically, I think the SEC is going to scoop them up. Like when we talk about the end game, not only for the Big Ten, but for the SEC, because you know that's the SEC's next move. The SEC's next move is Florida State. It's Miami. It's Clemson. It's protecting Atlanta and maybe holding on to Georgia Tech. It's getting to 20 when the ACC contract comes up. And if the ACC doesn't do anything with revenue and the SEC's making this gobs of money and the ESPN contract is up, you know, there's all of these Miami, Florida State, and Clemson. That's huge value for the SEC. That's huge value for ESPN. A Florida State versus Alabama matchup. A Clemson versus a LSU. You can't tell me that ESPN wouldn't want that. They will. ESPN, the SEC, they'll make it happen. Maybe they'll make it happen sooner than later. That's also possible to increase the value of the SEC. So we got to look at this realistically. Okay? We got to look at this from a realistic standpoint. Got to look at this realistically. I believe Notre Dame should be the number one target. Because even if you had Notre Dame and you get to 17 teams, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, USC, Notre Dame, those are big time college football programs. Huge college football programs. Where do I see the Big Ten ending? I honestly think it's hard for me to believe that the Big Ten is going to stop at 2 on the West Coast. It's hard for me to believe that maybe the island is set there. I kind of had some time to think about it. I haven't always thought this. As recent maybe as last week, I haven't thought this. But I think there's something that goes into owning the West Coast and owning that portion of America. And that might be what the end game is for the Big Ten Conference. And it might not be everybody on the West Coast. You might not have Cal. You might only need Stanford from the Bay Area. Okay? So I'm not sure the combination of teams. But I think there's going to be more teams on the West Coast. And I think you need somebody in the Bay Area. I think there's too many people, and I think there's too much potential in the Bay Area. Look, I know Stanford and Cal are not great athletic programs right now. Stanford has been better athletically than Cal over the years. But, man, it's hard for me to imagine right now USC and UCLA staying on an island out there. Texas A&M wanted to be on an island for a little bit, but eventually things happen. Things happen. Especially if maybe there's a Big Ten After Dark time slot on the line. So if those southern schools aren't available, I believe if you're the Big Ten, you got to give it the college try. You got to try to go down in there and grab a Georgia Tech, Florida State, Miami. My original thought for the end game was this. USC and UCLA on an island out west. I can see it to 16. Notre Dame gets you to 17. You add 3 more. Miami, Florida State, Georgia Tech. You got a couple of islands. I'll say that. You do have islands in the East and in the West. But that was my original end game to get to 20 teams. I just don't know if the SEC is going to let it happen, okay? There is this long rumored pact, I should say. I should add a T on there. Between SEC schools, because they needed a majority to vote it in a member, that said the teams that were the only state, like the South Carolina was the only SEC school in the state of South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and so on. There was a pact that said we're not going to let another team from one of these states, Clemson and Texas and all these schools, we're not going to let another team from our state be the other SEC school in our state. But then Texas ended up joining because of the brand that Texas is and what they bring to the conference. I think there's an argument to be made that your Miamis, your Florida States, your Clemsons, they might break that pact. I'm not saying they will. If Florida is being stubborn, the Big Ten, is going to go in there and scoop up Florida State and Miami. You know that's going to happen. But I just don't know if the SEC is going to let it happen. I don't know if ESPN is going to let it happen. ESPN, because they have that deal with the ACC right now, they could move, somehow finagle the grant of rights. I don't know. Once again, I got to do a couple of these things require a little bit more of a deep dive. But to be honest with you, you could go out and You could do a lot of these things. You could do a lot of these things. If the SEC doesn't want to play, the Big Ten will surely go in and grab. But I think the SECs want to play. I think they're going to want to build the brand of their conference, next television deal, and I think ESPN is going to be all for it. That's what I think. I think the end game is going to be Big Ten expansion on the West Coast. I think it's going to be Notre Dame. And I think it's maybe going to be 2 more ACC schools, something like a North Carolina and a Virginia. Okay, getting down to North Carolina, you're starting to get down to the South. Charlotte is a big market as well. It's a growing market, I believe, as well. In this scenario, in this endgame, the Big Ten owns the West Coast. There's a lot out there to be had. You own the West Coast. You can maybe have an after dark time slot. You got a West Coast pod out there. Then, of course, you got your terrestrial Big Ten like you have right now, and then maybe add North Carolina and Virginia as well. That's my realistic look. But this could really shuffle some feathers, because right now you look at those Florida States, your Miamis, your Clemsons, you look at those schools down there, and if those schools have an offer from the SEC and they have an offer from the Big Ten and they're pretty comparable financially, they might take the one where there's less travel. But they also might want exposure, but going to all these other places. But you got to think they want the one with less travel, and the one that a lot of people think, maybe not me and you, because we're watching Big Ten Ted here, but a lot of people think that the SEC is a more prestigious conference. And Florida States and the Miamis and the Clemsons might want to be a part of that. That seems to be the logical thing for me. If you split it up down there, hey, maybe things can happen. Maybe things can be a little bit different. USC and UCLA was kind of a shock to a lot of people. Maybe the Big Ten can go down into Florida and make some things happen. All right. Saw some comments in. I'm going to get to your comments here. Let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at it, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take a look at it. A2 checking in. 24 teams. It's getting a lot, because remember, the one thing you got to take a look at right now is you got to split the pot evenly. Everybody that you add has to bring significant value and has to make money for the other teams. But I've been talking about Oregon and Washington. Do they bring the value? I don't know. You got to ask New Money. Got to ask Amazon Prime, Apple TV, ESPN. You got to ask them. Got to ask them. I don't know. I don't have that inside information. I wish I did. Sunshine Design checking in. If Notre Dame is the end game, and I agree, the Big Ten only needs 3 West Coast teams, which you would add Stanford. That's something that people have talked about as well. Notre Dame, like you add Oregon and Washington as a pair. Notre Dame and Stanford as a pair. That gets you to 20. That's not a bad end game as well. I could get on board with that. You bring in the Bay Area, you bring in San Francisco, you bring in Seattle. You got a whole West Coast, and you bring in Notre Dame. It's just right now, the thing with Notre Dame is they're stuck in that ACC contract. I don't know when it's going to happen. Question from Tony. When do you think we'll see the 2024 schedule? So much depends on this. I think the big reason, because we didn't see the 2023 schedule until, was that this fall? I can't remember when we found out the 2023 schedule. I honestly believe we're not going to see it until at least the summer. We got to figure out, everybody in the Big Ten's got to figure out what's going to happen this summer. Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Cal, what's going to happen? New commissioner, what's going to happen? I'd say be patient on the schedule. That would be my recommendation. QQ, check it in. Nebraska's going to have to step it up to their past levels. The Big Ten needs them to be who they really are. I've said this a lot of times. A lot of talk. I watched Late Kick this week. There was a segment that Josh Pate did about insert blank. College football is great when insert blank is good. And I kind of agreed with him saying, well, I think that's kind of an overrated phrase. And then, who's ever good is good. College football will always be great. But in terms of this, I think the Big Ten needs Nebraska to be that brand, to be a team that wins big games and is in big television games. More from Tony chiming in. Notre Dame, Florida State, Clemson, Miami. Big Ten has got to get into the Southeast. That's where the kids are and where the people are moving. Population is increasing down south. I talked about the recruiting bases down there. If the Big Ten has access to Atlanta and to Florida, the game changes, ladies and gentlemen. You had LA and South Florida. 2 out of the 3 top recruiting bases in the country would belong to the Big Ten. The only problem is everybody's on an island. A lot of travel. More comments from Dave. He was our caller last week. If you need to get Florida State, nothing huge from a market perspective. I think the big thing with Florida State is they're obviously a big brand, right? They're a brand that everybody knows. They're kind of like a Nebraska, right? Is everybody yearning for Lincoln and Omaha? No, but they're a big brand that everybody watches, got a fan base, all that stuff. When you look at Florida State, I think the big thing for them, Florida recruiting, big fan base, big brand. It depends who they're paired with. It depends how all that happens down south. Buckshot Kid checking in again. The Big Ten needs one of the top 2 big-name brands from Texas. You know, if I had a time machine and I could go back and we could predict all this stuff happening, I would love to go in and grab Texas and Texas A&M. But I can't go back in a time machine. I can't go back and change that. Can you imagine the Big Ten having USC, UCLA, Texas, Texas A&M, Miami, Florida State? It's the 3 biggest recruiting markets right there in the United States. A2, once again, South Bend, Tallahassee, Miami, Atlanta, Seattle, Portland, Raleigh. You could probably throw Charlotte in there too. Charlottesville and Houston. All big markets. I heard the DMV area, which Charleston is kind of north, or Charleston. I meant Charlottesville is northern Virginia. I think a lot of people have been looking at that. And a lot of people in DMV has been more of a popular area. I think their population went down this past year. But still, I think Charlottesville is kind of north enough where it's kind of part of that area. Virginia. So DC, Maryland, Virginia. Congo checking in from Texas Tech or TCU. It's very interesting to look at the value of someone like a TCU or a Texas Tech, and someone especially like a TCU in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where they're not AAU. But when I said eventually there's going to be a time where the rubber meets the road, and they're going to have to decide academics or revenue/athletics. They're going to have to decide. University presidents, somebody's going to have to decide at some point in time. Tony mentioned before, Florida State has huge TV ratings and they play in a basketball conference. A basketball conference that didn't do very well in basketball this year. Just saying. Congo checking in. Georgia Tech, bad blood with the SEC. Yes, they left the SEC. That was back in the 50s, I believe. Time heals all wounds, maybe. Big Ten goes down. They get Georgia Tech. I know Atlanta is dominated a lot by Georgia Bulldog fans. It's a big Georgia Bulldog, those neutral site games that have been played there. Big time SEC territory in Atlanta. I don't think a lot of people are yearning to go to Georgia Tech games. But still, getting the Big Ten down in there, maybe that could change things. Congo also sees Georgia Tech in the Big Ten or the Big 12. That's interesting. That's something that we're not talking about with maybe some of these other schools. Maybe the Big 12. If the Big 10 or the SEC kind of leaves them out there, maybe the Big 12 would swoop in. Maybe the Big 10 would swoop in. Tony checking in once again. Good comments tonight, everybody. I don't think Disney wants to spend money right now. Remember that NBA contract is coming up soon, and they laid off a whole bunch of employees. So spending money might not be, you're right. They might not want to spend money right now. The financial aspects of these networks is a big deal. Where do they stand right now? Disney does not stand in a great position as a company. So that's going to have an effect on a lot of things. Crab cakes and football. Florida won't let Miami in the SEC. Yep, talked about this before, and FSU is joined at the hip with Miami. You remember, they were in different conferences, the Big East and the ACC, for a while. It seems like they're partners now. It seems like where one would go, the other would go. That seems to be, because we go in twos now a lot with these conference moves. Sometimes, a lot of times it's travel partners. You know, maybe Florida State and Miami would go. I think together they make more sense in terms of realism. They make more sense maybe going to the SEC than the Big Ten. But we'll see. We'll see. Congo, will Texas A&M leave for the Big 16, the Big 10? No, I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're very happy in the SEC. They're making a lot of money in the SEC. I just don't see your big programs leaving the SEC right now. That's the way I see it. Tony, well, we're kind of on the same page a little bit. I don't think Georgia Tech brings Atlanta football fans, and Atlanta are Bulldog fans. Yep, just said that. Yeah, that's a very good point. I don't think Georgia Tech has a huge following, and I don't think it's a lot about Georgia Tech. Just like I don't think it was a lot about Rutgers when they moved to New York City. It was more about the market. We'll see how that progresses. See if that's eventually something that may happen. Sunshine Design, Stanford, Notre Dame, Washington, either Cal or Oregon, not both. 20 teams. I always thought around 20 teams. We mentioned, someone commented, I think it was A2 that commented before, about 24. I think the end game is right around 20 for the Big Ten and the SEC. I honestly believe that. I talked about the schools that I thought, if it's not Georgia Tech, maybe it'd be Miami, Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina for the SEC. And then for the Big Ten, you can see Notre Dame, Stanford, Oregon, and Washington. And there's your 20 versus 20. That's how it could end up. And then what's left for the ACC? And then the ACC becomes a lot like the Pac-12. I don't know if the Pac-12 is ever going to die. I think them and the Mountain West Conference could merge, or they take some of the better Mountain West teams, and the Pac-12 eventually will be a G5 team, or what is now the G5. And eventually I think we could maybe see a Power 3 with the Big 12, the Big 10, and the SEC, with the Big 12 maybe being a little bit more aggressive in some of this conference realignment as well. Vince Watson, Auburn and Alabama. Yeah, I was talking about that pact before. I think this pact was after the original SEC. I can't remember, maybe it was the 80s or something, but at that point, Alabama and Auburn had been in the SEC for some time as well. It was a pact between, Georgia, South Carolina, and there's nobody else in Arkansas, Texas, all the teams that had one team in their state in the SEC. Moving on. Good comments tonight, everybody. Good comments. All right. Congo, ESPN versus Big Ten, not the other way around. I can see ESPN out for a long time when you already on OTA networks. Yeah, you're sitting at Fox, CBS, and NBC. I would rather, if you want to see, you want to know what I want? I'll tell you what I want. We can keep ESPN out. I'm not against that. I think ESPN, look where ESPN's at right now. Look where we've gotten to right now. ESPN has swallowed up a lot of the SEC content. Right now, they got a few games of Big Ten football the last couple of years, and the narrative has shifted towards the SEC on ESPN. Having one game on ESPN isn't all of a sudden going to make ESPN talk about you more. They're still going to be hammering home the SEC until they're blue in the face. So why not just make the split and just break it all together, right? Just break it up all together. Donnie wants to see the Panthers. I clicked on the wrong comment, but I'll read this comment. Here's Tim. If the Big Ten goes to 20 or 24 teams, do you think they will ever go away with non-conference games? Oh, boy, can opened. Boy, that is interesting. I think eventually they're going to go to 10 games. At least. Let's say you go and add both. I'm talking about both the SEC and the Big Ten. right now, the way things are going, say you get Oregon and Washington, you get Notre Dame, Stanford, like you get 20 there. And then I mentioned, let's go North Carolina, Clemson, Miami, Florida State. Who do you need to play? You don't need to play non-conference games. Now the Big Ten and SEC might as well just break apart and Big Ten champion, SEC champion playing the whole shebang. Play for it all. You're going to see more conference games. The bigger these conferences get, it's just the nature. It makes it easier on scheduling. 10, that gives you room for 2 non-conference games. Getting to 11, boy, it all depends. It all depends how all this shakes out. I'm very intrigued to see what happens. Very intrigued to see what happens. Especially scheduling. Remember, the more teams you add to the league, scheduling is going to continue to get difficult. More difficult. Our buddy Jared Jones checking in. Hey, everyone. Petitti for president. Petitti for president. Well, he's going to have to settle for commissioner now. And let's hope he doesn't leave in the amount of time that Kevin Warren did. We'll hope he stays around. Friend of the show, Erica Goldberg, resident Hawkeye fan, asked, does Florida State and other southern states fit into the conference academically? There's so much about the money and academics are being pushed to the side. Not sure when you came in, but I did mention this. Eventually, there's going to be a moment. It could be this summer. Well, maybe not this summer, but it could be down the road a little bit. Eventually, Big Ten presidents, mostly Big Ten presidents, are going to have to decide. Do we want to keep up the academic prestige of our conference? Or do we want to chase the dollar? Or do we want to chase revenue? Which one do we want? I firmly believe Big Ten presidents want both. They want a bunch of money for their university to pour into their academic programs and their athletic programs and research and all this stuff that universities do. But they also want the Big Ten to remain a highly prestigious academic conference, which has been very important, which has been the whole AAU thing, only taking AAU members with the exception of possibly Notre Dame down the road. They're going to have to decide. Because, yeah, you can add Stanford and Cal and Oregon and Washington. Okay, that kind of meets things. All AAU members, academically, it's pretty good. But now you go into the South. You go to Florida State. Apparently they're teetering. They're trying to get to AAU membership. Georgia Tech and North Carolina are really the only schools down there that have AAU membership. Both pretty good academic schools. And maybe that's where the Big Ten is. Maybe hey, we're going to go into the South. We're going to try to get down there, but we want to keep up I think there's a balance that can be made, but you can't get Florida State. You can't get Miami. You can't get Clemson. If you go there, you're selling your soul to revenue. That's what you're doing. That's the position you're taking. If you had Georgia Tech and North Carolina and Virginia, now you take a little bit of a different position. You says, well, we still want to get down south, but we want to still ensure our academic prestige as a conference. Decisions will have to be made. Mirrors will have to be looked into by these Big Ten presidents because there will be a decision. There will be a decision eventually from these presidents. There will be a decision. Some good conference realignment talk here tonight. That's the topic of conversation, of course, with the Big Ten commissioner, a new Big Ten commissioner coming in. And we'll have coverage on this. He's the introductory press conference for Tony Petitti is on April 28th in Rosemont, Illinois at the Big Ten offices. I believe it's May 15th would be his first day. His first day. So it's going to be interesting to see all the things that happen. You got to think rumors are going to be floating around before then, and you know I'll have an opinion on all of it. Jared Jones, we talked about non-conference games. Loves a good non-conference game, not going to lie. Yeah, it's good to see these, but now, before you saw, well, it's not every time you see a team in the South versus Wisconsin or whatever. Now you could have Florida State in the Big Ten, Georgia Tech in the Big Ten, USC and UCLA in the Big Ten. You could have all of these things, all of these schools in the Big Ten. And now what used to be a non-conference game is just a conference game. It's just a conference game. It's like in the NFL, in the NFC. The Green Bay Packers and the San Francisco 49ers turned into a rivalry over time. How far away is that? That's really far away. That's really far away. Many, many states in between Wisconsin and California, let me tell you that. But it still turned into a rivalry. That's what I talked about before with the end game. We've got to get to an end game. We've got to get to a point where we can settle down for 20 years and 30 years and 40 years where we can establish rivalries. The more we kind of see this happening and going down the line, the more we have to adjust the schedule. The more, maybe rivalries like a Michigan State, like an Iowa and a Minnesota, some of these secondary rivalries. I don't want to say like those rivalries are awesome rivalries. Floyd and Paul Bunyan. But, Michigan and Ohio State is a primary. I don't know. I'd be very curious to see. That's maybe a topic for later on, is because Iowa and Minnesota is a fantastic historical rivalry. The story of the Floyd of Rosedale is fantastic. Iowa and Nebraska is a very recent rivalry. But then you have Wisconsin and Minnesota. How do they all view each other? Especially from like a Minnesota standpoint. Minnesota versus Wisconsin and Minnesota versus Iowa. I think they're closer than a lot of people realize. It's like, well, they played Wisconsin last game of the year. Then must be their main rival. I think for a while, I can't remember when, maybe the 80s, maybe the 90s, Iowa and Minnesota played the last game of the year. It wasn't always the battle for the axe. That was, I think, sometimes in the middle of the season. Sunshine Design loves a great East-West game. That was the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl is no longer. Okay? That really made me sad this year, really seeing Penn State and Utah, the last Rose Bowl of its kind. The last Rose Bowl of its kind. Big Ten, Pac-10. The Rose Bowl will never be the same. College football will never be the same. I'm a traditionalist. I love the Rose Bowl. I grew up watching the Rose Bowl. I grew up in Wisconsin. Some of my first memories as a sports fan are New Year's Day 1999 or New Year's Day 2000, seeing Ron Dane beating Cade McNown and UCLA. And then the next year they beat Stanford in the Rose Bowl. Those are some of my memories. We're going to make new memories. We're going to evolve. We're going to evolve. A couple of guys pointing out here, Congo and Tony pointing out not AAU. Nebraska's kind of an easy. They snuck in there. Lost AAU status shortly after joining the conference. Notre Dame, not AAU. Yeah, they're different, but that's always been the exception to the rule for the Big Ten Conference. For the Big Ten. We talk about, Erica asked the question before, and now we could see them selling their souls to the Benjamins. Yeah, because the Big Ten presidents want academic prestige, but they also want money. Which way you going to go? You got to choose one. You got to choose one. Right? Sometimes when I was growing up, my mom says, you can either have a soda or you can have a chocolate milk. I'm like, I don't want to decide. I want both. Doesn't work that way. Got to choose one. Got to choose one. Got to choose one. Jared Jones, thank you, my man, for the super chat. Love the show. Notre Dame to the Big Ten within 5 years. Do you know a good lawyer, Jared? Because if that's going to happen, then Notre Dame or the Big Ten is going to need a good lawyer. ACC recently the conference hired some general counsel because maybe they can see what is happening. They can see down the road what might happen. Florida State, Clemson, maybe Notre Dame might challenge the grant of rights. If they challenge that grant of rights, baby, ooh, baby, things are going to get hot, and I do not know much about anything legal. So might have to get a lawyer on this channel. That might be some very interesting things as well. All right. More comments. Great comments here today. Thanks for the super chats, everybody. Thanks to Mike. Appreciate the super chat here tonight. Great way to support the channel. Great way for this channel to continue to grow. More comments. Comments are coming in. Really appreciate everybody for being here tonight. It's been a big week. It's been a big couple of days. Big Ten country. I was driving my way home the other night from work. I get home. Blah, 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 Tony Petitti. Who's Tony Petitti? Well, time to hit the Google. That's kind of how that went. Tony chiming in. Not many schools in the ACC can carry the freight when it comes to value. Big Ten not going to add schools if it means to pay cut to current schools. I've said that about current Pac-12 schools before. Oregon and Washington. I've seen that as well there. I've said that recently there. It all depends what networks are willing to pay. Tony Petitti's got the connections at these conferences or these networks. How's that going to go? How's that going to translate? I think that's something we all need to figure out. Here's something from Congo. Do you foresee Tony Petitti going against the ACC grant of rights? You know, if it costs the conference money, it's not going to happen. Okay, let me just say that out front. Let me say that outright. Ain't happening. This is going to have to be more. I think in the next few years, you're going to see a lot from the ACC. You're going to see a ton of information. You're going to see a lot of people maybe trying to get out of the Big Ten, no one wants to get out of the Big Ten. Get out of the ACC. Challenge the grant of rights. The problem is, if the Big Ten had a big deal with ESPN, I think it'd be less of a deal. That's why ACC and SEC, right? They're both under the ESPN umbrella. I think it'd be easier. But with going to Fox, going to a competitor, going to need a good lawyer to try to get out of it. That's all I'll say about that. That's something I'd have to do more of a deep dive on. That's something I would need to talk to someone who has experience with that. Can this type of contract be challenged in a court of law? Erica mentioned our resident Hawkeye fan. You won't convince Iowa to give up the game against Iowa State. That is a huge deal. If I'm not mistaken, it's a sponsored game. The Cyhawk game, the Cyhawk series, it might be called. I think when they play basketball and stuff as well. That's a big. There's some of these non-conference games are a big deal for a lot of people. Big deal, folks. Big deal. The more conference games you have, the less non-conference games you're going to have. Iowa State, I'd have to think of some other ones off the top of my head for the Big Ten right now. A lot going through this old noggin right now. So I'd have to sit down and really think about that. But Iowa State, definitely one that sticks to my mind about some non-conference rivalries. Going through some, it's funny. I played NCAA 14 for a long time, and this was a suggested protected rival. Remember when we had 12 teams? I think we had a protected rival from each division, Penn State, Nebraska. I thought that was going to kind of be a game that we'd see more often. We haven't seen it, I don't think, as much as people have wanted. It's been a while, because what do we do? 9 conference games. You only play 3 crossovers. And sometimes, like Michigan and Nebraska, I think now have played for like 3 straight years, it seems. So you don't see some of these crossovers as much as you'd like sometimes. Sunshine Design, I'm afraid Iowa State just, I just don't think the Big Ten presidents are really, I don't know if they are really clamoring for Ames, Iowa, and the television market of Ames, Iowa. It'd be a great Big Ten road trip for me, straight down 35 to Ames. Getting to Iowa from Minneapolis right now, you got to go a little bit over to get to Iowa City. Ames is a straight shot down, 3 hours or so. 3 hours or so. Some good comments coming in. Very much appreciate everybody here tonight. Good live stream talking a lot of Big Ten expansion. We've still got one more segment to get to. We're going to talk about the spring games. See some stuff in the comment maybe going more towards on the field. They play football on the field too, believe it or not. It's not just a television product. There's people in the stands. Here's an interesting take. Good stuff tonight. Willing to give up the rivalry with Minnesota. Okay. Because the lack of competition as of late, that's been the one thing. PJ has got an 11-win season under his belt. He's won, let's see if I can remember this. Is it 3 of 5 against Wisconsin? Or is it 3 of 4? Something like that. He's done well as of late against Wisconsin. Has never beaten Iowa. That's the one thing. That's the monkey on PJ Fleck's back right now. And I'll tell you one thing. I'm not sure. If you're looking to get that monkey off the back, I think last year's close game in the cold of Minneapolis, I think that was the time to do it. But in more ways than one, they fumbled it away. This is interesting because this is a great rivalry game. Minnesota and Iowa is a great rivalry game. You know, and obviously rivalry games don't have to be played every year. You can go a year or 2 years without playing one and then resume it. Just don't go too long without playing. Tony talking about winning Minnesota, Wisconsin, most played game in the Power 5. I remember I was at College Game Day in 2019 when this was a West Division championship game, and they said it on College Game Day. Eric Decker was the guest picker, where they said it was something like completely even. Wins, losses, ties was completely even. It's crazy. You play that long and it's still completely even. Amazing. All right. More good comments. Reading through some of these comments here tonight about rivalries. Buckshot Kid wants to go. You want to go way onto the academic side. 2 schools I would like to see in the Big Ten, Yale and Harvard. Not big football brands, but the 2 biggest school names from, boy, you bring in a rivalry. We're talking about rivalries and conference realignment. There you go. Yale and Harvard. Harvard up in the Boston area. So, I know Boston College is an AAU, but sometimes I'm surprised that maybe Boston College doesn't get talked about as much. Boston, I don't know how much of an appetite there is for college football up in the Northeast. There haven't been a lot of great. Penn State about is as close as you get, but in terms of Massachusetts and New York and stuff like that, I know Rutgers is now in the Big Ten, but in terms of the Northeast, doesn't seem like there's a huge appetite for college football. Of course, the NFL, Buffalo Bills are a great team. The Patriots have been a great team. I just don't know about college football. Let's see what else we got. Lewis Papp would owe Georgia Tech just for Atlanta. And maybe that's something the Big Ten would do. I think it's very possible. I just Atlanta, I don't know. It's very similar to Rutgers and New York City. It has very similar vibes right now. Very similar vibes. Good comments coming in here tonight. Watching through everything. Hard to keep up sometimes. Hard to keep up. One way to stand out sometimes on nights like this, a super chat. A couple of guys supported the channel right with that, so that's a good way to stand out here. But I'm going to try to get through some of these comments. I want to get through some of these comments right now before I get to the on-the-field stuff. I want to make that transition nice and smooth here tonight. Let's see what else we got here coming up in the comments as well. Good interaction here tonight from Buckshot Kid. Ted, do you play Revamped? I'll tell you the story about my Xbox and NCAA 14. As long as I kind of talked about it before, I played so much NCAA. I've got somewhere in here, they're right there on the floor. I got NCAA 07 and 06 on PS2. I got 14 on Xbox 360. year ago, 2 years ago, Red Ring of Death. Xbox died. Before that, I was having my NCAA 14 game was a little bit scratched, and I tried to download it to the hard drive, all kinds of stuff like this. I don't play it anymore. I don't play Revamped, but man, what those guys have done with Revamped is amazing. I've seen Fox graphics packages. I've seen ESPN graphics packages. As a TV guy and as a guy that works in TV and loves analyzing the graphics packages and all this stuff, I love seeing what the guys at Revamped have done with that game. It's amazing. It's amazing what they've done with that game. I wish I was able to play it, but just told you why I can't. All right, more comments here right now. Jonathan Weaver, keep the pig and the bull, coming from another Hawkeye fan. So you're talking about the Floyd of Rosedale and the Heartland Trophy, which is the bull, the Iowa-Wisconsin game. And they could do without maybe the Heroes game, the Heroes Trophy, or whatever that, I forgot what the name of that is, of the Nebraska game. The Nebraska game. So we got a couple of other sports. Jared Jones, stick around. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about spring games coming up. Devin Brown not playing, hand issue, throwing hand injury. I'll have a video coming out tomorrow that I taped earlier in the week about Devin Brown and Kyle McCord as well. I taped it earlier in the week. But it still applies despite the injury. You know, we're gonna provide something we don't see every day. Fans, you could even, an Iowa fan, maybe any fan, a lot of non-Minnesota fans don't like PJ Fleck. I like PJ for a while. I think he's fine. It's just maybe some of the stuff, the rah-rah stuff is wearing off on me a little bit. But, man, we got an Iowa fan likes PJ Fleck. I like it. Putting the rivalry aside a little bit. Buckshot Kid wants to see more Big Ten hockey schools. I see Nebraska. When I look at Big Ten hockey, I see two. I see Rutgers and I see Nebraska. Nebraska already has UNO, Nebraska Omaha, which is a very good hockey program in the country, a part of the NCHC, the National Collegiate Hockey Conference. I could see Trev Alberts, the former athletic director at UNO, could be supportive of hockey. Rutgers is in an area where they could recruit and have hockey support as well. That's how I view that. Good comments tonight, everybody. Really appreciate the interaction here tonight. It's been a fun show. A lot of big news. But this is all the off-the-field stuff. This is the television. This Saturday, we've got some action on the field. We've got spring games, and there are battles in these 4 spring games. We've got Indiana, we've got Penn State, we've got Michigan State, and we've got Ohio State. 4 pretty good spring games. Only 2 of them, I believe, are on Big Ten Network. Let's talk about these spring games, because there are battles that I want to keep an eye on. Okay? Let's talk first about Ohio State, since that was just mentioned. Of course, the quarterback battle you want to keep an eye on, Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. Devin Brown just suffered an injury to his throwing hand, so he will not be able to go, and that quarterback battle is essentially decided, it seems like right now. But that was an interesting battle going in, hearing a lot of stuff out of Columbus, how even they were. They were both doing well. I'll have a video coming out tomorrow on the channel, drops at 7 a.m., talking about, doesn't even matter. Their skill positions are so damn good. I don't think it even matters. Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Ibuka, Cade Stover. You keep on going down the list. I could go out there and throw for 1,000, 2,000 yards in this offense. I haven't played quarterback in a while. I'll say that. When I look at Ohio State, I want to see the chemistry. I want to see the timing, because that's one thing I've heard out of Columbus that's been really good with Kyle McCord. Chemistry, timing, anticipation, reading where receivers are going to be. It doesn't surprise me because Kyle McCord and Marvin Harrison Jr. have that relationship already. They tore it up at St. Joseph's Prep in the Philadelphia area when they were in high school. And Marvin Harrison Jr. has had some things to say like, hey, when Kyle gets his time, he's going to shine. And it looks like that time is going to be this season for Kyle McCord. I want to see chemistry. I want to see timing. I want to see guys like, even though Xavier Johnson's not playing, I want to see the other receivers that are playing in this system for Ohio State. I want to see them run a 10-yard out route, and right when they put the foot in their ground and right when they make that break, boom, turn around, hands up, ball's there. I want to see that timing. I want to see that chemistry. I want to see where it is with Kyle McCord and this great receiving core, because, man, Marvin Harrison Jr. might be the very best player in all of college football. His absence single-handedly determined the national champion. If he was in that game in the fourth quarter, that Peach Bowl in the fourth quarter of the college football playoff semifinal, we wouldn't be talking about Georgia going back-to-back. I can guarantee you that. That was a huge deciding factor on who came out as the national champion. So I want to see the chemistry. I want to see the timing early in this game. And when we talk about Ohio State, I want to talk about offensive line depth. They're losing 3 of 5 offensive line starters. I want to see that depth on the offensive line. I want to see them go against that great front seven. There's been a lot of talent. Second year under Jim Knowles as defensive coordinator. Maybe this is the year where things really get step up and they really attack. So that's what I want to see out of the Ohio State spring game. I'm going to quickly mention Indiana. That's another quarterback battle. You got Taven Jackson, the transfer from Tennessee. A lot of quarterback talent going on there at Tennessee. So he transfers back to his home state and his home school of Indiana, Brendan Sorsby. Taven Jackson's probably going to win this battle. Brendan Sorsby, a 3-star guy, not very highly ranked. Taven Jackson, I've watched them both on film. Taven Jackson looks more the talented guy. That would not surprise me. But Tom Allen does not commit to anything. He won't commit to this quarterback battle. I just want to see how close it is. I want to see Taven Jackson pull away during the spring game. They're struggling on defense. Indiana's does not have a lot on the defensive side of the ball. I honestly believe that they need to really pick it up on defense. Offense, I look at Cam Camper, I look at Jalen Lucas, I look at Taven Jackson. I look at some players that Indiana has put together, and I'm like, okay, it's not bad. Look, it's going to be tough in the Big Ten East, but I look at what they've put together, and I see some good things. Okay, so that's what I see with the Indiana Hoosiers. Talked about Ohio State already. Michigan State. We've got a quarterback battle here. Even though Peyton Thorne is the experienced guy that's been there for a minute. Peyton Thorne against 4-star, highly touted guy, Katin Houser. Ask anybody around East Lansing. They'll tell you Katin Houser is the future of Michigan State football. Is the future now. Mel Tucker's all about competition. Every spot is open, according to Mel Tucker. Seems like it's going to take a lot to unseat Peyton Thorne. It seems like this quarterback competition is maybe meant to motivate Peyton more than anything. We've seen Peyton go out there and play well. 2 years ago, over 3,000 yards, whole lot of touchdowns at Michigan State. But he had a guy named Kenneth Walker behind him, which really, really helped a lot. So where is Michigan State in their quarterback battle? And man, their front seven looks okay. They've added some good transfers. Jacoby Windman and Cal Halliday are in that linebacking core band. They're losing Xavier Henderson. They need something on defense. They need something on the secondary. I'm worried about Michigan State if they don't really bring it. Because I look at that secondary and they're losing possibly their best defensive player in Xavier Henderson. And now you look around their secondary and it's not much. I talked about my who needs to hit the portal. You look at Michigan State right now, that's a team that needs to hit the portal this spring on defense. So I want to see in this spring game, I want to see who stands out at quarterback. I want to see how well their defense is on the front seven, because I think the front seven could be okay. The secondary, though, has got a lot of work to go. Lastly, Penn State. Been receiving a lot of attention. The Penn State machine, the hype machine. Penn State in the East, Wisconsin in the West. Okay, if you're looking at a hype versus hype Big Ten championship game, it's Penn State against Wisconsin. Rematch of that 2016 game. But I want to see Drew Allar. A lot of hype even last year about Drew Allar. I want to see just how good he is. They've got really good talent at Penn State, both on offense, both on defense. Everybody's been hyping up this team. I want to see what all the hype is about. Drew Allar, does he have the timing? I talked about the timing with the wide receivers. Is he on target with some of his wide receivers as well? Want to see that. Trey Potts, the former Minnesota running back, just announced he's transferring to Penn State. Obviously, he's not in spring ball. He won't play in the spring game. But he could be involved in terms of running back depth. When we talk about running back depth, when you talk about pass blocking, he's also not bad at catching the football out of the backfield. So I want to see if there are holes when I watch the spring game. And maybe if there are, it says, well, Trey Potts could plug in here, Trey Potts could plug in there, all of that stuff. Penn State's a good football team, ladies and gentlemen. This is a really good football team. Right now, I honestly don't know. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, I have no idea who's going to come out of there. I have no idea. I'm going to watch spring games. I'm going to watch the rest of spring ball. I'm going to see what happens in the spring transfer period. And then that's when the rosters will be solidified. And then that's when we're going to make our decisions. And then that's when things are going to really shape up as to who's going to be able to contend. Penn State can do it. If Drew Allar is who we think he is, this team could be really good, folks. This team could win a Big Ten championship. I firmly believe that. Is our buddy Jimmy Franklin, is he a good enough coach to get past Ohio State and Michigan? You got to get past at least one of them probably. Is he good enough to make that happen? That's what I want to know. So some spring games coming up here this weekend. And then the weekend after, April 22nd, got a whole chunk of spring games. We're going to have 13 spring games this year. Purdue is having renovations to their stadium, so they are not going to have a spring game. Renovations out there at Ross-Ade Stadium. Going to get caught up here on some comments. Here's something. I talked to a friend about this. Discord. I know it's like a forum, man. I sound like I'm 80 when I'm probably saying this, but I honestly don't know a ton about Discord. I know it's like a chat. It's a forum type of thing. If that's something people would be interested to have a Big Ten-wide discussion all the time, Discord, let me know. Tweet, comments, whatever. Let me know if that's something you're interested in. If a good amount of people are interested in, I could definitely set up a Big Ten TED Discord where you can be chatting about Big Ten stuff all the time. So I am definitely open to the idea. Maybe I just need to be a little bit more educated on Discord, on exactly what it is. Jared Jones, the Ohio State fan here. I'm nervous about Penn State this year. They can be really good. They ended last year with a bang in that Rose Bowl game. I know Cameron Rising wasn't in that game, but man, were they good. Abdul Carter and Kalen King are young on defense. They've recruited really well at skill positions. Their running backs are amazing. Drew Allar is great and shows great arm talent on tape. They've done some things at the wide receiver position, bringing in Trey Potts. They are serious this year, folks. I always thought 2024 was the year of the Nittany Lion. It could be 2023. Who knows? Mike, I appreciate you coming by here tonight. He's got to run. Great show. Appreciate all the love, and we will see you next Wednesday, hopefully. We'll see you next Wednesday. Wednesday nights, 9 Eastern, 8 Central, 7 Mountain, 6 Pacific, and a couple more is Hawaiian. That's all I know. That's what I know. That's what I know. Tim Prangley is here. Appreciate that. He's got we are welcoming USC and UCLA fans to this channel. We welcome everybody to this channel, obviously. But USC and UCLA fans will be a part of the family. There's a chance this year, I've been thinking about this, I've been covering USC and UCLA games, providing previews and reaction videos to them. So just so I can kind of get a gauge of the Bruins and the Trojans as we continue to go on here. So Tim, thanks for being a part of the show tonight. I think Tim's a part of a Trojan Conquest show Sunday nights. That may or may not be correct. Correct me, Tim, if I'm wrong in the comments. I've been watching that show the last few weeks. Good stuff over there, I believe, at the USC channel on the Voice of College Football Network over there. All right, let's see what we got here. Not a wannabe. You'll be one of us soon. You'll be here. I consider USC and UCLA. I'm on board already. I'm on board. Like I said, I'll be doing a lot more watching of USC and UCLA this season. I remember watching that USC and UCLA game last season. I was very intrigued by both teams because they both have young quarterbacks, Malachi Nelson and Dante Moore. So I just can't show up day number one with USC and UCLA and not know much about them. I got to do my homework, got to do my research. So I'll be watching a lot more USC and UCLA. Lewis Papp knows what it's all about. I would say the battle for the Spear of Greece. USC and Michigan State Trojan Spartans. It writes itself, ladies and gentlemen. That's the rivalry. We got to have USC and Michigan State as a protected rivalry. We got to have that happen. Got to have that happening. So we've covered all of our segments here tonight. If you guys want to talk about a certain topic here to finish off the show, you want to call, you want to do whatever, now is the time to do that. Appreciate everybody's comments here today on the show. All good stuff here tonight. Just a reminder, coming up on the channel here this week, tomorrow, we've got Devin Brown, Kyle McCord. Does it matter who the Ohio State quarterback is going to be with those plethora of weapons? And then on Friday, will the college football playoff kill off bowl games once and for all? I think there's a realistic possibility of that potentially happening here tonight. We've talked about a little bit about hockey, rivalries. Of course, the message, or I should say the news, of Tony Petitti being the head coach. Jeez, I'm getting all sorts of things messed up. Tony Petitti being the new commissioner of the Big Ten. There we go. So we've talked about that and what it means for the future of the Big Ten Conference, because there's a lot, and it means a lot. Jared, Ohio State, Michigan, USC, Penn State, Wisconsin, Iowa. Look at all those. Like, when we've talked about expansion earlier in the show, and then, but when you look at this, that's pretty good looking too. You look at Luke Fickell's Wisconsin teams. Some people say they're overhyped. We'll see what happens. I love what Wisconsin's done. I think UCLA is going to take a big step when they join the Big Ten. I think already they've taken a big step in recruiting and everything. They got a guy in Chip Kelly that's been there and done that at an elite level with football. And that's a really good lineup of teams right there. That's a really good lineup of teams. Okay, and then occasionally you get the year where some of these other teams really jump up into the fray and are good. Illinois, I think it's going to be a good team for 2 years in a row. Okay, Maryland has been a solid team, 7 to 8 win team. Who knows? Maybe they can take a step up. Maybe they can be good. Maybe that's something we need to keep an eye on. Really appreciate all the engagement here tonight. It's been fun here on Big Ten TED Live. I can't wait for this season. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Ten Conference before we go to 2024, before we go to this new deal. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Ten Conference before we go to 2024, before we go to this new deal. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Ten Conference before we go to 2024, before we go to this new deal. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Ten Conference before we go to 2024, before we go to this new deal. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Ten Conference before we go to 2024, before we go to this new deal. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Ten Conference before we go to 2024, before we go to this new deal. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Ten Conference before we go to 2024, before we go to this new deal. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Ten Conference before we go to 2024, before we go to this new deal. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Ten Conference before we go to 2024, before we go to this new deal. 2023 will be the last of its kind in the Big Maybe a 3-6-6 scheduling format. Who knows? Maybe Oregon and maybe Washington are going to be in the conference by then. Maybe Stanford and Cal will be in the conference. We don't know. There's still a lot, and I mean a lot, to be determined. So we're going to find out all of that as we continue to progress on. But I can't wait for this season. I think there's a lot of very interesting storylines this season. I think you've got Wisconsin. Can they live up to the hype? Everybody, including me, thinks they're going to win the West right now. Right now. Iowa is improved. Where are we going to be at with the Hawkeyes? That defense is fantastic. Fantastic defense. Okay? You keep on going down the line. The West is going to be very fun to watch this year, folks. The Big Ten West is going to be bonkers. And it's not maybe like last year where maybe the teams weren't the best. I think Minnesota, I know they got a tough schedule, but I think they're going to be solid. They got to figure some things out on defense, but the offensive transfers that they brought in have been very good. Wisconsin, Nebraska, we'll see if they can finally put it together. Can they finally put it together under Matt Rule? The talent is there. The talent was there under Scott Frost, but the talent is there right here and right now. So that's what we need to know. It's going to be a fun year. It's going to be a fun build-up until the 2023 season. It's been a fun night tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're going to shut her down. If you want to see something covered in terms of a live stream next week, tweets, comments, that's the way to do it. I'm always up for feedback. I always want to do what you guys want to see. It's been a fun discussion tonight talking about conference realignment, talking about Tony Petitti, talking about the end game. Where will the Big Ten look like in a couple of years? Talking about who are some potential candidates. Folks, it's only going to go up from here. It's only going to heat up. Things are only going to get more interesting as we continue throughout the Big Ten Conference. Want to appreciate everybody for coming aboard here tonight. Lewis, that's what the Super Chat button's for. There you go. Got a thanks button as well. But this has been Ed for Big Ten Ted Live tonight. Next Wednesday, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central. You know where it is. It's here on Big Ten Ted Live. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm Big Ten Ted, and you know it. We will see you in the next one.